In Pioneers Wanted, Philip Clarke lays out the 8 principles to address the existential threat facing many organisations. He talks to us about what he's learned interviewing pioneers in diverse fields and how it's developed his approach to consulting with leaders. So this idea of pioneer leadership, which is different, I get it's different from being an entrepreneur. I think it's a really important thing to make that distinction, because basically what you're doing is you're creating new markets, you're solving new problems, you're leaving legacy for future generations to be able to do different things. And it's different from the forces of creative destruction as well, because I think we'll come back to that in a moment as a way of thinking about this. But the piece that strikes me here as really important to dig into is that virtually everybody that we talk to in our careers in large organizations at the senior level, the first time they're asked to do real innovation, and I don't mean the kind of incremental product development type stuff, but the market innovation is when they get to the top. And they've spent 25 years building status quo management, de-risking, as you say, down through the organization, focusing on getting to the next layer of power. And now all of a sudden they're asked to adopt a completely different way of thinking about stuff. And the tension between delivering short-term and growth or pioneering or whatever, kind of different frame you want to put around it it's like trying to become a schizophrenic in middle age. That's quite an interesting challenge. So how do they do it? How do people make that leap?
I had a really interesting conversation with a guy who I think he runs a private equity business or venture capital business, and we were having this conversation, and he was talking about the fact that they invest in fast-growing small businesses with a 5 and 15-year investment horizon, because they're not looking for a quick return. They're looking for structural shift, which they can lead. Well, that was interesting. And then he said, look, if you want to really understand intergenerational decision-making and leadership, you look at family-owned businesses. And he'd talk about someone like Bertelsmann, where the fear of the people who have inherited this business is not that they're not jumping on the latest thing. It's not that they're not tapping into a couple of digits of growth. Their fear is that the business won't be there to pass on to their kids or their grandchildren. And if you're thinking about existential challenges, then you have license to make decisions which play out over quite a long time horizon. If you're in media and you look at it and you think, print media and publishing, there's no money left in that, we need to shift, then you can, assuming you can make the cash work, you can work on that for a decade to make things change. Find me a listed business or a big investor-owned business that will give you a decade's license to reinvent yourself and find out what's right. They won't, because it's not what they're there for. And so one of the things is, if you come up through a business, you're part of the machine, and your skills, you become adept at managing short-term decisions for short-term gain. And that stuff's really okay as long as you're going through fairly steady waters. It's only when you get hit on the head with disruption that it gets messy, or actually when you have a situation like we have in quite a lot of regulated industries where that disruption has been kind of kept at bay by regulatory constraints. It was difficult to get into some of these markets, but now those constraints have come off. You've got a whole load of stuff that should have happened 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. It's now all coming, all of this obvious stuff I talked about, and you don't have enough expertise, and you don't have enough money, and you don't have enough capacity to fix it. I was having a conversation with a guy in a big payments business, and I spent a few years working. I had a real job once. I've mostly been a consultant, but I did have a real job. I worked in a business that's now owned by MasterCard, a payments business, and this business ran like the gold-plated infrastructure that makes sure money flows between banks. And this was not an environment in which people liked the idea of disruption or taking risks. I was really a fish out of water. I was there for a couple of years, and it was really eye-opening, because I got to the end of it, and it was the first time that I suddenly thought, oh yeah, maybe there are some places you should just strive for operational excellence and breaking things is not welcome. That was a decade ago. And the decade since I left there, I did loads of cool stuff. Looked to me like there were loads of opportunities. And hey, guess what? Payments has been an extraordinary opportunity for an awful lot of investors and an awful lot of people. Square just bought Afterpay for $39 billion. It's a business which was, again, obvious a decade ago, right? Because there's so much pent up stuff. So there are some environments where you don't want people disrupting. I suspect that if you're undergoing heart surgery, that's not the point at which you want someone to have a brainwave. But fundamentally, if we look at a slightly more aggregate level, our expectations of what is good enough are set by the experiences we have across sectors, and the expectations that leaders have of what's good enough for their business is set by the aggregate expectation of their own sector. And it's only by these challenges coming along and saying, why do we do it this way? We can do it this way. It can be fundamentally different. We can rewrite some of the basic rules. That's really helpful. But I don't think that every business can bridge from here to there. I'm a big believer that some organizations are so heavily invested in legacy operations and legacy business models, let alone legacy technology, which excites me much less than it seems to excite most people, that they're better off using their ability to create money from today's machine to either invest in tomorrow's businesses, or better still, to fund at very much at arm's length an entirely new venturing capacity with new culture and new intention to cannibalize the business they're in. Nearly all of the corporate innovation initiatives I've seen or been part of in the last 15 or 20 years have failed to do anything substantial in reinventing the mothership. Apps and hacks and labs, it's great innovation theater, and it makes it easy for you to connect with the startup community. Good for culture, makes you feel like you're doing something, but so little of it addresses fundamental business model reinvention that it is just lipstick on a pig. The business is going in the wrong direction. Innovation teams and apps, hacks, labs aren't going to solve that problem. So I figure make hay while the sun shines, make that money, but push that money out to a new vehicle that can build the future. Fundamentally, you've either got to defend against disruption or you've got to harness it for growth. And I think the mothership needs to defend against and push the money somewhere else where it can be more effectively harnessed for growth. Sometimes the place you're at is not the right place to start your growth venture.
We hope you're enjoying the Evolving Leaders shorts that we're releasing before we start Season 7 in September. You can find the rest of this conversation and all of the Evolving Leader episodes on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and your favourite podcast outlet. I'll also put a link in the show notes.